What makes good journalism? What is the purpose of journalism would be another way to phrase that question. We're bombarded with so much of the bad stuff that it's hard to remember what the good stuff even looks like. And it's tempting just to say it's the opposite of whatever the hell we're seeing now. The truth is obviously part of it. It's the quest for and the dissemination of the truth. That's certainly a vital base for journalism. And just by checking that box, you're already ahead of a big chunk of today's so-called journalism. But the simple truth isn't itself sufficient either. Reporting that the sky is blue or that grass is green is true reporting, but it's not necessarily good reporting. That's why it's so unsatisfying to see journalists like one of the authors of today's piece defend their work solely on the basis of accuracy or truth, as though those are the only ingredients to quality journalistic work. So what is sufficient then? What is the mark of good work? Well, to consider that philosophical question, let's consider our philosophical founding. Consider why the press was protected at this country's inception. Why is the press listed right after speech itself as explicitly off limits from government regulation? And it is to protect the acquisition of the truth, yes, but beyond that, it's in the Bill of Rights for the same reason we included everything else in the Bill of Rights. It's an important check on power. It ensures that those exercising power are subject to perpetual and unrestricted scrutiny. In other words, a properly functioning free press fulfills its purpose by holding those in power to account. That's why reporting on a hobo stealing a sandwich from a dumpster isn't valued the same as reporting on a corrupt politician with his hands in the taxpayer cookie jar. Both are true. Both are of a similar property crime theme, but one is valued much more highly than the other. Why? Because it focuses its scrutiny on a power center that affects us all. Glenn Greenwald, who's a big part of today's story that we'll get to later, had a great summary of this concept and modern journalism a few weeks ago when he tweeted, "If you think the real power centers in the US are the Proud Boys, 4chan, and Boogaloos, rather than the CIA, FBI, NSA, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley, and you spend most of your time battling the former while serving the latter as stenographers, your journalism is definitionally shit." And the examples of this journalistic bastardization in recent years are plenty. Not just failing to scrutinize those power centers, but actually acting on their behalf to target the little guy. Think CNN targeting some random Florida old lady for sharing Russian Facebook posts. Think that other time where they targeted a guy who made a Trump wrestling meme and threatened to dox him until they coerced an ISIS video-style apology out of him. Think of all the business owners targeted for supposed coronavirus violations, with much less scrutiny for whether these restrictions have any legitimacy or effectiveness in the first place.
Employees and customers, young and old, almost entirely without masks.
That is not a check on power. That's just goonery on behalf of the power. But that is what a lot of today's journalism has become. A lot of today's journalists are much less concerned with how power is wielded and much more concerned with what that power is serving. Because if it's for the right cause or the right ideas, power can go ahead and abuse away as far as they're concerned. And often they'll jump in to help, which is exactly what today's story does. It undermines core constitutional principles of this country, and it happily hops on the state's abuse bandwagon, not on the basis of any journalistic philosophy, just on the basis that the authors favor the ideological outcome. It serves the political interests that they like, and it punishes the political interests that they don't. Neutral principle about fair treatment? Be damned. USA Today's Sunday headline, Insurrection Fundraiser, Capitol Riot extremists and Trump supporters raise money for lawyer bills online. This piece supposedly exposes how accused Capitol rioters have been collecting money for their legal defenses across various platforms, as though one, it's shocking or atypical for those accused of crime to build their defenses before trial, or two, that any financial services facilitating these transactions have some moral responsibility for the transactions themselves. Well, yeah, but it's true. That's the defense from one of the authors. What is your criticism? That the story isn't true? Because it is true, and therefore any criticism is invalid. Well, you do have some factual and philosophical problems here. First, this story doesn't just report the truth of who's participating in and facilitating these transactions. It engages in activism to stop it. In several cases throughout this story, the journalists, quote, alerted, their word in the story, not mine, alerted Venmo, the Cash App, and other financial services about funds being collected, gleefully reporting those accounts were deleted after their heroic intervention. That's not simply reporting a story. That is actively participating in a story on behalf of a particular worldview. And you might say, oh, well, it was the crime of the century, so we're justified in holding those who committed it to account. Okay, but even that perspective has problems. One, it was not the crime of the century. If simply the truth is the only criteria for journalistic quality and integrity, it'd be nice if USA Today would include this truth: a huge portion of accused rioters are facing minor misdemeanor charges. Another huge portion are still awaiting charges, but a bulk of the charges are simply trespassing. Very few of the accused rioters are likely to serve jail time because the charges just don't support that type of harsh sentence. We're talking about minor crimes, not major ones. Why those accused of minor crimes getting the most robust legal defense they can is some sort of moral failure to expose, these USA Today journos will have to explain. But beyond that, why it's a failure for anybody to get the best legal defense fund they possibly can, they'll have to explain as well. Because it doesn't matter if they burned the Capitol to the ground. It doesn't matter if they successfully committed political assassinations. The right of the accused to a proper legal defense and a presumption of innocence is of the highest importance to protect. Why? Again, because it's a crucial check on power. The unrestrained power of the state to convict and punish the accused without proper demonstration of guilt will be an injustice on a scale that won't make the Capitol riot even look like the crime of the week, let alone the crime of the century. If you think the Capitol riot was abuse, just wait to see what happens when you cut the state a blank check to do the same thing and much worse to you and everybody else. Oh, but we're not talking about the state or a trial. We're only talking about private business. First of all, if you are meddling with a defendant's ability to build his legal defense, you are meddling with the trial. But second, if you believe in the philosophy that the accused deserve a proper defense and a presumption of innocence, what's the moral distinction? How would it be immoral for the government to punish that person, but perfectly moral for you or PayPal to do it? And even if it is moral, is it effective? Is it wise? You do not want to set this standard that facilitation of a transaction implies agreement with the transaction or the parties to it. If I use PayPal to send OJ $20, does that mean PayPal thinks that Nicole and Ronald got what was coming? Because if so, PayPal and everybody else is going to have to waste a bunch of time and resources purity testing every single exchange, instead of just making the exchanges as efficient as possible to benefit as many people as possible. And even if PayPal was capable of efficiently making those assignments of guilt, do you really want them to have that power? For all the complaints you may have about our current justice system, it is, at least philosophically and foundationally, rooted in the people. If we don't like a particular verdict, or we don't like a particular sentence, or we don't like anything about a particular legal outcome, we can change the law. We can change those who execute the law. We can change the process. We have some say in the administration of justice. And maybe you think that say is minimal, fine, but how would it be maximized by handing over what power we do have to centralized corporate control? Because trust me, if you don't like the American justice status quo, I assure you, you're really not going to like justice sponsored by Coca-Cola and Frito-Lay. And you may call that an absurd scenario, but tell me, where does the logic end? Because if PayPal or Venmo are responsible for free consensual transactions in support of Riot defense funds, why not Ford, in whose vehicles the rioters drove to the Capitol that day? Why not Subway, in whose restaurants the rioters ate lunch? It seems to me this does not stop until we have separate societies. This will not end until we actually do fully implement corporate-sponsored ostracism. And maybe you're saying, yeah, well, I heard guys like you and the rest of them ripping Kamala Harris for promoting a Minneapolis rioter defense fund. Yeah, you're right. You did. And I still would. I wouldn't give money to that fund. I wouldn't encourage you to give money to that fund. And I'll criticize Kamala for promoting it. But here's the key difference. That is simply an argument to abstain from participation. I have not heard anybody going after PayPal or the credit card companies whose logos are still proudly displayed on the fundraiser page that is still up to this day. I don't think these financial companies are responsible for these transactions, and I wouldn't try to stop them from facilitating them. Arguing against and criticizing are not the same thing as meddling. And I wouldn't advocate meddling with these defense funds either for the same reasons just described. But meddling is exactly what USA Today did. But criticism, of course, gets conflated with a lot of things. Not just meddling, but harassment too. And that's the final piece of this story. Glenn Greenwald picked up this USA Today article, and it fit that exact role of bastardized journalism that he's been regularly discussing, and so he tweeted about it. And it turns out this is actually the first official USA Today story published for the lead author. So she tweeted the announcement of her first story, and Glenn responded, quote, "Congratulations on using your new journalistic platform to try to pressure tech companies to terminate the ability of impoverished criminal defendants to raise money for their legal defense from online donations. You're well on your way upward in the industry for sure." And that, of course, is not principled criticism. That is, what else? Sexist harassment. And so the blue check mafia descended on Greenwald. He's a misogynistic troll. He has 1.5 million Twitter followers and a Pulitzer Prize, and he's going after an intern on her first byline. As though this story was published in the high school student newspaper. It was published in the Sunday edition of the second largest newspaper in the country by circulation. And it wasn't written by an intern. It was written by 3 people whose product cleared the editorial process and personnel at that giant operation. This is a national media Goliath targeting everyday American Davids, accused of committing crimes, granted, but those crimes will be adjudicated. The point is, in no way does this author or USA Today lack power in this scenario. Just notice the complete reversal. Not only do these journalists abdicate their job of keeping those in power in check, they actually abuse what power they do have to target the relatively powerless. And then when they get called out on it, they clutch their pearls and they claim to be a victim of the same sort of unfair power they happily wield against others. There is no definition of harassment that this USA Today journalist suffered that she didn't also inflict on the people she targeted with her so-called journalism. She got off much easier, actually. Nobody severed her income. Nobody severed her access to services. Nobody undermined American philosophical or constitutional norms in going after her. They just said, your work sucks and you should rethink it. If that constitutes harassment, you should give up on this quest of deleting the internet for everybody else right away. You are much better off just deleting the internet for yourself. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.